Hey everybody, thanks for joining me for Quick Tip Thursday. This is Nichole Paschal, and today we are going over how to create effective depth maps in the new Topaz Lens Effects. So let's go ahead and get started. With this new depth map creation, you might run into a few roadblocks. So really this webinar is just to give you a few tips, a few tricks that might help you along when you have a pretty difficult image that you are using. So I'm going to use my Bokeh selective and go to Edit Depth Map. Again, my split screen will occur and I'm looking on my original image on the left and my preview image on the right. Let me show you real quick about this original image and what I'm trying to do. This original image, there is actually 3 different layers to this structure. But it's really hard to tell that. Everything kind of blends together and it's hard to, because the colors are very similar, it's hard to see those different layers. So my objective is to put a depth map on this image that will allow me to separate those layers and separate those depths. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reset my map completely. This computer generated one is an okay one, but I'm going to have to do a lot of tweaking, so I'm not even going to worry about it, quite honestly. So I'm going to, let's just reset. Okay, so now that we're in this reset mode, the first thing I'm going to do is create a gradient. I'm going to create a gradient over here on the foreground right here to this background area. I'm also going to create it over here, but I'm going to stay away from the actual structure to make it a little bit easier for me to grab that at the end. This structure is going to be kind of difficult with all of those edges and texture, so I want to just give myself as much room to select that by itself as possible. So I've selected my gradient starting value at 0, my gradient ending value at 255. Again, that's black to white, near to far, and my brush size is at 255 because I'm doing this pretty big gradient. And I'm just going to select and go just above the trees, do something like this, and put a few different strokes all in this one little area, but not actually go over the structure itself. Now I'm going to come over to the very left-hand side, get a gradient of about the same, about like that. And it might select part of the structure. That's okay. You're not actually painting over the structure, so that's good. Now I'm going to put one right directly in the middle because, as you can see, there's this little doorway over here. So I'm going to just come right up the middle and right about there. That did not work out correctly. Let's try that one more time. There we go. You can kind of see over here on the map that that is selected correctly. Now that we've done that, I'm going to put some constraints on this sky. This sky I'm going to want to be the farthest thing away from my lens, obviously, and it is going to be that 255 value. So I'm going to unclick my Use Gradient brush, come back over to my depth value and click on 255. I'm still going to have somewhat of a large brush size, and I'm just going to start up here at the top and see what it does, see if it fills down. It does. So this Topaz Smart Brush is a content-aware type of brush. It thinks for you and tries to locate the edges, tries to kind of think about what you're trying to do, and it does a pretty good job. So it came down to that edge, and I'm just going to leave it there right now. I'm actually going to put a few little more constraints on it. Okay, and now I'm going to work with my structure. Now my first actual tip here is going to be using the dropper tool to select the unknown values in your map. So with this gradient that we've created, it's going to make it easier to find out what value these different layers should be. So I'm going to come over here to my little dropper tool, click on that, and I'm going to come right to the bottom of this first panel, this first plane of my structure. I'm just going to click over to the right in my gradient, but on that same level. So there we go. My depth value has gone to 92, so now I'm going to paint this very front wall of this structure at a 92. I'm going to take my brush size down to about 108. That will do just fine. And I'm going to paint this entire area this 192. And it will start to fill out on its own. And if you still want to paint over it just a little bit to give it some constraints, that works too. All right, so now that let's see here, let me use a little bit smaller of a brush. It's being a little bit difficult. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of forget about this front area just for a moment, and I'm going to come to this second plane. The second wall, which is kind of tucked beneath this arch of this first one, I'm going to find that value the same way. I'm going to click on my little dropper tool, and I'm going to come find the edge of where that plane will start, and then come out to the edge of that gradient over here right in the middle, over to the right, click on that, and my depth value goes to 154. Now I'm going to paint this structure, or this plane, that 154. And it will just kind of fill out on its own because, again, it is that content-aware type of feeling to it. So let's just grab a couple more strokes here. Okay, so as you are working with your depth maps and the different brush sizes, you will notice that as you take your brush size down, your smaller sizes are able to become much more precise. Your larger sizes are going to fill out more in the edges. So it's almost like a really soft brush around the actual brush size. So just be aware that's what's happening, and as you take your brush down, that kind of filling in the edges around the brush size will go away. It will become a much harder brush, and it will become easier to control, but then it won't do as much filling of the area of that plane. It won't do as much thinking, if you will. Okay, I'm also going to come over here and get this little edge right there. I'm using somewhat of a small brush size, so that's what's going on. And I'll get up there too. Okay, so now we have this area right about here, right in this little window, this old window. So the way I'm going to find that is very similar to what we just did. So I'm going to come over here to the right and click, and it goes to 193. Now I'm going to just paint this right here in the middle. And there we go. We have our first layer, our second layer, and our third layer back here. And then even beyond that, we have even a new layer, which is the foliage. Okay, the last thing I'm going to do on this before we kind of come in and do a quick cleanup of these edges is create one more gradient. And that's another tip. To use gradients where you can. So the way that the reason I'm going to use a gradient, because that's kind of what it is. We have this foreground, or this first plane, going back to this area back here. So I want to use a gradient brush to do that, just to help me do a very smooth transition. First, I will go back to my regular Topaz Smart Brush, click on the little dropper tool, click on this foreground area, so I know what I painted it in. It's 93. My depth value slider just jumped to that, and I'm going to click on Use Gradient Brush. Note that your gradient starting value is going to be at that depth value you just selected, which is 93. So you can, if you're going from, let's say, a black or white to that 93, you don't necessarily have to have your starting value as the 0 if that's for the foreground. You can go backwards. It's just wherever you start your gradient and then end your gradient with your actual brush stroke. So that's pretty nice. But I do need to go back and actually find what this value is as well, because I forgot that. So let's try that too. So this first one's at 93. The second one is at 155. So I'm going to say go back to Use Gradient Brush. That value is at 155, so I'm going to put this ending value at 93. And now I'm going to start at my 95 area, which is going to be back here, and go towards my 93 area. So just a simple stroke will solve that issue and makes it a much more realistic type of gradient. Okay, let's move on. Let me go into these edges real quick. You might notice in some areas that, especially with really textured stuff, you have these edges that don't look so great. So a really nice way to solve this issue is to come in to zoom in on those edges and take your brush size down pretty low. And then find the values that you need to use. So this one is 93. Just go to 93 here. And just outline those edges as close as you can. You can do it on the original, which is probably smarter than doing it on the map because you don't really know what's going on. And it will just fill out to those edges, which is really nice. So then you can keep just going across and doing those. It might take a little bit extra time, but it's worth it in the end if you're looking for a really, really nice depth map. But to be quite honest, you don't necessarily need a perfect depth map, especially if you're not going really, really, really blurry or a really, really intense bokeh. You don't necessarily need that to be very perfect, and I'll show you why here in just a second. I'm going to take my depth value to 255, click right here, kind of fill out these little areas that, there we go. And because I don't have anything painted in here actually, that is why it's reading that, and I'm going to have to come back in and just do a quick outline of those edges. So again, because we haven't actually painted any values in here, it's just doing a content aware fill, that's why it kind of takes those edges back to, it's just trying to think too hard, I think. But it's pretty simple to get it to the right value. You just have to come in and work with it a little bit more. Okay, and again, the tip number 3, use small brushes when you are doing this part. If you use large brushes, it will not be to your advantage at all. Okay, I'm about to stop just to show you because we are going close to our time here, and I want to show you what we've already done. And I want to show you how to save and load your mask if that's something you're interested in doing afterwards. Because you might be working on something pretty hard and you might need to go do something, and it's a nice thing to have that ability to come right back in and do that. So there we go. Let's take one last little thing here. I want to change, well, we'll just stop here. Okay, so let me go to this focal plane adjustments. With your focal plane adjustments, you get to choose which value is your focal plane. Let's zoom out a little bit to see everything. So if I want to make this front area my focal plane, I can just click on that right there. And now that is my focal plane. Let me get this background blur pretty heavy and the foreground blur. So you can begin to see these 3 different areas now. This is going to be a little bit less in focus in this front plane, and then this plane in the window here is even more less in focus. Now again, this is really exaggerated with the blur, so it's looking kind of funny, but I wanted to show you that you can just click on the plane that you want to put in focus, and that is what will pop up. So it's a really good thing to be able to create these different depth maps, or pretty effective depth maps, so you don't have to, so once you have created it, you're able to just go exactly where you want to within your image. I'm not sure why my focal plane's not going back there. There we go. So this is just a quick example. If you want to ever save or load your mask, you go right here to Save Mask or Load Mask, and so if you've been working on a mask and you want to bring it back in, you just load it back in, and then you're able to continue working on it. Also, within this focal plane positioning, you can change your depth of field to include more of the values in front and in back of this focal plane position value. So if I want to, for example, what I would want to do with this image is make this front area my focus area and then have these two blurred areas in the back and not so much foreground blur, just to be a little bit more realistic, and then have a pretty large depth of field. So pretty quickly we've gone from here to here, and let's change some of this focused area as well. Let me take some of that off. So okay, so we've gone from here to here in just a few steps. And again, this map is not perfect right now. We'd still have to go back in and do a little bit of tweaking to get it correct. But this is great to be able to go from your depth map to your focal plane adjustments and see exactly what's going on and how it's affecting your picture. Because sometimes getting it perfect really doesn't matter. You know, it's not going to look bad on your image. So it's nice to be able to see exactly what's going on and be able to go back and forth. Thanks again, and have a great afternoon. Thanks for coming to Quick Tip Thursday. We'll have more coming over the month for lens effects, so definitely take a look at those. I'm excited about Miniature Scenes 101 coming up next week. So take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.